We interrupt this broadcast with breaking news. Officials are confirming a major incident in the downtown core. We will bring you updates as soon as we have them.
Well, Veronica, the big question we're looking to get answers to right now are the identities of some of the people who were arrested earlier this morning in those FBI raids. And like Gino said, we're expecting some arraignments for one or a couple of...
At 11:07 p.m., inside a fluorescent lit briefing room in downtown Minneapolis, the numbers hit the wall like a verdict. 73 coordinated warrants. 9 cities across Minnesota, $2.84 billion in alleged public loss traced through procurement fraud, grant laundering, and shell logistics. 2.1 million fentanyl pills recovered in 1 week, packaged to look like prescription medicine, stamped with counterfeit markings and routed through warehouses that never appeared on any public map. And 24 officials flagged for compromise indicators. The spokesperson didn't call it a cartel, not out loud. But everyone in that room knew what it was. A corporate financial syndicate so embedded in contracts, courtrooms, and community nonprofits that it didn't need street corners. It had conference rooms. It had signatures. It had judges. And the briefing ended with the kind of sentence that doesn't belong in a democracy, but keeps showing up anyway. This may be the largest infiltration ever uncovered in the upper Midwest. They promised transparency. They promised accountability. They promised they'd show how deep it goes. And then came the line that made every reporter's pen stop moving. The next part is worse, because the next part wasn't about drugs. It was about the person who could make evidence disappear. The person who could delay raids with one phone call. The person who could turn a courtroom into a shield. A federal judge, spotlighted as a community protector, whispered about as something else entirely. And if you think this story is about one bad actor, stay with it, because the system wasn't simply corrupted. It was engineered. At 4:32 a.m., Minneapolis, Minnesota, a winter fog sat low over the river like a lid on a boiling pot. Streetlights turned the mist into pale halos, and the city looked asleep in the way cities do right before they wake up screaming. On the north end of an industrial strip, near a row of shuttered loading docks, black SUVs rolled in without sirens. No music, no chatter, just tires whispering over frost. FBI agents in dark jackets stepped out first, rifles angled down but ready. Dia followed, moving like they'd done this 1,000 times. ICE tactical teams stacked behind them, quiet and fast, eyes cutting through shadows. Minneapolis SWAT pulled up last, armored, heavy, and absolutely certain about what was behind those doors. They were not hitting one place. They were hitting 12. At the same time, an underground casino operating behind a members-only lounge, a cartel-run bar that never charged cover but always made money, a massage front building with locked rooms that weren't on the floor plan, a warehouse with refrigeration units running in January for no legitimate reason, a small accounting office whose windows were always dark, even during tax season, and a quiet residential house where the curtains never opened. At 4:33 a.m., the first breach. A bolt cutter snapped a chain like it was brittle plastic. The door buckled on the second hit. Flashbang, white light, a crack of sound that turned the room inside out. Agents flooded in, black helmets, clear commands, boots pounding concrete. Some suspects froze. Hands up, eyes wide, others ran. And those are the ones who always tell the truth about what they were holding. A man sprinted toward a back exit clutching a duffel bag so heavy it dragged his shoulder down. He didn't make it to the door. An agent tackled him hard. The bag split and cash spilled across the floor in fat rubber-banded bricks. Another suspect tried to throw a phone into a sink. Too late. FBI had a Faraday bag in hand like they expected it, because they did. At 4:41 a.m., 10 miles away, in a warehouse near Bloomington, SWAT hit a steel side door with a ram. Inside, pallets. Inside the pallets, boxes labeled industrial tubing. Inside the boxes, fentanyl pills stacked in vacuum-sealed bricks, each brick marked with fake pharmaceutical logos. A DEA agent called out numbers, voice flat, like reading weather. 200,000. 400, 600. By 5:06 a.m., the tally from that one location alone was over 900,000 pills. Meanwhile, ICE teams hit a transit house in Richfield, a place registered to a charity that claimed it provided temporary housing assistance. The beds were real. So were the locks. So were the lists. Names, ages, routes. Every entry marked with dates, pickup points, and payments. Migrant smuggling as a revenue stream. Human trafficking as a logistics problem. And all of it sitting under the surface of a city that still believed it was safe because it looked normal. At 5:18 a.m., the final hit of the first wave went down in St. Paul. A small tech repair storefront with a smiling logo and a same-day service sign. FBI and DH cyber specialists had flagged it months ago as a signal relay node. The front was empty, the back was not. They found a wall that looked like drywall until an agent tapped it, listening. Hollow. They cut it open, behind it a server rack. Not one, 6. Fans still spinning, LEDs blinking like a heartbeat, and on the floor, under the lowest rack, sealed steel boxes with tamper screws. The kind of containers people use when they're not just hiding from police, but hiding from history. A tech ran a handheld scanner along the lid. Encrypted storage, he said. Another agent lifted the box and felt the weight. Ledgers. Someone whispered. But it wasn't paper. It was colder than that. It was digital. It was permanent. And taped to the underside of the top box was a label. Printed cleanly, no handwriting, no panic. Just 2 words. Bench key at 6:02 a.m. Inside a federal cyber forensics lab, secure facility, undisclosed location, coffee sat untouched. Nobody was drinking anything. Because once you see a system like this, your body forgets hunger. Screens glowed blue across the room. Analysts moved between terminals, gloved hands working keyboards that never connected to the outside world. They pulled the drives. They mirrored them. They isolated them. And then they began cracking. Not with brute force, with patience, with pattern, with the kind of expertise you only build when you've spent years listening to criminals lie through code. At 7:19 a.m., the first layer fell. A network map bloomed across the main screen, lines and nodes branching like a nervous system. At the center, an internal project name. Not Solaris. Something colder. Project North Star. Because it wasn't just about moving drugs. It was about guiding them, pointing them, making an entire state lean in the direction the Syndicate wanted. Shell companies stacked on shell companies. Ghost corporations formed and dissolved in the time it takes a jury to be seated. Sham charities with heartfelt names. A non-profit foundation for youth opportunity that never ran a single program. Restaurant chains used for cash commingling. Logistics firms used for freight cover. A green energy contractor that billed the state for parts that never existed. Money flowed out of Minnesota, then back in, filtered through offshore accounts and disguised transfers. One analyst highlighted a recurring authorization string, an encrypted key used to approve large moves. It wasn't a password, it was a signature. A digital stamp tied to a secure token. And the token's registration file, buried in metadata, carried a name. Judge Kellen Rourke. Federal bench, publicly known as a calm, articulate guardian of civil process. A man who spoke at community events about fairness and the rule of law. A man spotlighted in local media as a bridge between systems and neighborhoods. And now, in a cold lab where facts don't care about speeches, his signature was tied to freight schedules, tunnel construction bids near the border, and a corridor protocol that synchronized narcotics shipments with courthouse calendars. That's when the supervising agent said it out loud. This is not corruption. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. This is command-level collusion. Another analyst pulled up a second file, North Star Phase 2/bench, inside a list of case numbers. Search warrants delayed, evidence hearings postponed, prosecutors reassigned, confidential informants exposed, not by accident, by design. This isn't negligence, the agent continued, staring at the map as if it could stare back. This is engineered treason, and the open loop hung in the air, heavy and unfinished. If a federal judge was the authorization key, then the syndicate wasn't hiding under the system, it was sitting inside it, and the operation had only begun. At 3:46 a.m. The next day, because yes, they moved that fast, the command center came alive. A hardened room, banks of screens, radios murmuring, and one giant digital map dominating the wall. Minnesota lit up like a wound. Dozens of red markers pulsed across Minneapolis, St. Paul, Duluth, Rochester, Mankato, St. Cloud, Moorhead, Bloomington, and smaller towns that looked too quiet to matter. Except they did. Every marker was a node. Every node was a doorway. Every doorway was a decision someone made to let the syndicate breathe. The mission brief was short and brutal. Over 1,100 federal agents, 36 SWAT teams, ICE tactical units, FBI heart support staged in region, DIA diversion squads, DEEF cyber operators, Black Hawk helicopters prepared for overwatch and rapid extraction, armored units for high-risk targets, and yes, air assets were on standby for intimidation and border control, not because this was a war, but because the syndicate had built something that behaved like one. At 4:10 a.m., raids detonated across the state in a synchronized rhythm. In the outskirts near a frozen industrial park, agents hit a desert plain-style warehouse. Flat, isolated, perfect for a drug superlab. Inside, chemical barrels, pill presses, drying racks, and ventilation systems engineered like a factory. Methamphetamine processing on one side, fentanyl pill stamping on the other. A DIA chemist took one breath and stepped back. "Vince wrong," he said. "It wasn't just toxic. It was weaponized incompetence, built to kill workers and keep them replaceable." In a wealthy hillside neighborhood outside the Twin Cities, a mansion sat like a trophy. A drug fortress disguised as luxury. Security cameras hidden in landscaping. A reinforced safe room behind a wine cellar. Agents breached with precision, cutting power, flooding the perimeter, taking the guards before they could make calls. Inside, high-grade rifles, suppressors, gold bars, and stacks of documents stamped with state procurement codes. Not just contraband. Paperwork. The kind that says the syndicate didn't fear law enforcement because it had learned to speak the language of government. Near the border, quiet roads, flat land, long sight lines, teams located a tunnel system hidden beneath a stormwater remediation project. It wasn't deep like some movie fantasy. It was practical. It was engineered. It was paid for with public funds. And it connected staging points used for migrant smuggling corridors and narcotics transfer routes. At a transit house in St. Cloud, ICE teams found more lists, more locks, more stories that didn't belong in filing cabinets. In Duluth, agents hit a port-adjacent storage site. Shipping manifests were altered. Weights didn't match. Containers moved at odd hours. A logistics supervisor tried to explain it away with a laugh that cracked under pressure. The money found there wasn't loose bills, it was structured. It was laundered through invoice games and maintenance contracts. By midday, the seizures were stacking like grim trophies. Tons of narcotics across multiple types. Cocaine bricks wrapped in plastic and prayer. Heroin bundled tight and labeled as resin. Meth packaged in crystalline blocks. Fentanyl pills, again and again, millions. Server farms, not just single laptops. Communication hubs, encrypted radios, cash, weapons. And in one courthouse-adjacent office leased under a shell company, agents recovered a binder titled, in plain ink, Bench Influence. This wasn't a street gang, this was an empire with spreadsheets. By 10:22 a.m., the arrest teams moved on their highest value human target. Not a kingpin in a hoodie, a man in a suit, a man who didn't run when doors shattered, because he wasn't used to doors being shattered for him. Judge Kellen Rourke was taken into custody in a quiet residential area, the kind of neighborhood where the loudest sound is a snowplow. He stepped onto his porch like he was going to greet a neighbor. Then he saw the agents, FBI in front, ICE and DIA behind, a federal arrest warrant in hand, and for the first time in years, the judge's face did something his public mask never did. It tightened. Not fear. Calculation. As cuffs clicked, a reporter later described his eyes as offended, as if consequences were a procedural error. 6 hours. That's all it took. And by the time the sun fully climbed over Minnesota, the underworld took more damage in 6 hours than in the last 6 years. Then the second story began. Because the drugs were only the fuel. The real machine was betrayal. Inside a secure evidence facility, investigators started examining seized servers, call logs, transaction histories, patrol records, internal emails. The picture turned uglier with every scroll. It wasn't just money, it was timing. Border relaxations scheduled like appointments. Convoys passed when way stations were down for maintenance. Patrol grids falsified so units were always busy in the wrong place. Raid schedules leaked hours before execution. Informant identities burned, cases quietly reassigned, and it wasn't one or two bad cops. The numbers arrived like a punch. 47 law enforcement personnel flagged across agencies and jurisdictions. 12 border adjacent officers. 9 courthouse security officials. 3 prosecutors' office staff. 2 judges in state-level courts suspected of being compromised through favors and pressure. Names sealed pending indictment. And a chain of mid-level planners who made the whole system look legitimate while it bent. Honest officers, people who still believed in the badge, stood in silence watching the evidence play. One veteran SWAT sergeant, a fictional name in this fictional story, Sergeant Mara Voss, stared at an email thread where a raid location had been forwarded to an unknown contact with the subject line, FYI. She didn't cry. She didn't shout. She just swallowed, hard. "Those were my people," she said, voice low. "They were waiting for us." And in that moment, you could feel what corruption actually is. Not a headline, a weight, a betrayal that turns every traffic stop, every door knock, every radio call into a question. Who else is on their side? Federal agents began arresting senior figures, deputy chiefs, planners, internal coordinators, people who signed overtime sheets and smiled at community events. Some tried to negotiate immediately. Some went quiet. Some insisted they were just following orders. But the pattern was undeniable. The Syndicate had built a parallel enforcement system, a second secret police force, not with uniforms, with influence, with money, with the quiet ability to redirect attention. And the investigators said the line that ends careers and starts reform. The badge will be rebuilt from the ground up. Then, the scope widened, because Minnesota was the hub. But the routes? The routes didn't stop at the state line. A new map appeared in the command center, this one broader. Lines stretched across multiple states, feeding into port cities, agricultural corridors, and trucking routes that looked like ordinary commerce. Contractors, subcontractors, freight brokers, all of them touch points, all of them plausible, all of them clean on paper. That's how Project North Star worked. It didn't move like an invading army, it moved like a supply chain. Narcotics could shift in tons per week without triggering alerts, because alerts were engineered to look elsewhere. Shipping manifests altered with small changes, weights adjusted just enough to pass, inspection schedules shifted, random checks became predictably non-random. Migrant smuggling and human trafficking used as cover, not because the Syndicate cared about ideology, but because chaos makes great camouflage. The final catastrophic file was uncovered late, because it was buried deep under layers of false directories. A document labeled North Star/Permanentity, and it wasn't a confession, it was a plan. A decades-long blueprint to turn the region into a permanent headquarters for the Syndicate's corporate financial cartel. Not a hideout, a capital. It included targets, procurement offices, regulatory boards, court assignments, grant committees, and community-facing foundations used to generate loyalty. It didn't just describe infiltration, it described redesign, a system rebuilt to serve cartel future, and one line, highlighted by an analyst, landed like a cold hand around the throat. Stability is achieved when enforcement becomes administration. Read that again. Because that's the chilling realization. The system wasn't simply infiltrated, it was being rewritten. For the Syndicate. For decades. And now, the story ends where it always should have started, with the human cost. Because behind every 2.1 million fentanyl pills is a neighborhood holding funerals it can't afford. Behind every cocaine brick is a family collapsing in slow motion. Behind every heroin bundle is another person disappearing from their own life. Behind every meth shipment is another apartment with broken windows and a silence nobody wants to talk about. Power doesn't always need open violence. Sometimes it only needs silence. Ambition. And the confidence that nobody will check the paperwork. A dramatization inspired by real issues, organized crime, political infiltration, financial laundering, human trafficking, migrant smuggling, narcotics pipelines. It's not presented as real news. But if you're still watching, ask yourself something simple. How many systems do you trust because they look official? How many leaders do you believe because they speak calmly? How many institutions feel safe until the day the door comes off the hinges at 4:32 a.m.? If you want more stories like this dragged into the light, tap like so more people see it. Comment expose if you believe corruption survives only when good people look away. And remember, this was fiction. Names were invented. Events were dramatized. But the warning is real. When crime learns bureaucracy, it doesn't need to hide in the shadows. It learns to sit in the front row. And sign the papers.